Hi, welcome to the webinar. I'm Kevin McKenzie, the head of product marketing at Prodigal. And today we're going to explore how to stop the riskiest agent mistakes. So we have a great panel of people with us today. You can see them up floating in those little boxes. So I'll introduce them very shortly. But before that, just wanted to run you through the agenda. So what we're going to do is we're going to identify what are those riskiest agent mistakes. Also talk about how to proactively prevent agent mistakes. And then we'll go to the after call side and look at QA and compliance. So with that, I'd like to introduce Tomekia, our first panelist. She's the QA Compliance Manager and the Extended Business Office Manager at Rash Curtis and Associates, has over 20 years of experience in debt collection, including medical, retail, housing debt. She's also managed her department for over 7 years and has trained collectors in international call centers in Baja, Mexico and Nairobi, Kenya. Welcome to the webinar. To help the
Thank you
audience
for
get to
having
know
me.
you a little bit better, would you mind sharing a little bit about your roles and those teams that you're managing?
Well, at the moment, I just took on a new role for pre-collect from some of our major hospitals, where, as in now, it's not third-party collections, it's like an extension of that client.
Okay.
So I have associates that work here on site that act as if they are at the hospital. They're just an extension of the hospital.
Ah,
They answer the phones as if they're at the hospital level. The great part about having the early out department is that we don't have to adhere to third-party collection laws.
hmm.
Makes it a little bit easier collecting the debt, but my guys have the mindset of a collector. So we tend to get them a lot of money on that side, just based off the mentality or how they're trained.
I see. Yeah. And across the teams that you're managing right now, would you mind giving us a feel for the size of those teams? Like day to day, how many people are directly working with you, or even beyond that when you're doing training sessions, things like that, so we can kind of get some perspective there.
Yes, great. So on my auditing side, compliance side, I have 4 auditors that work under me.
Hmm.
And on my pre-collect side, I have 7 collectors or representatives that work for me.
Yeah.
So I have a nice sized team, and we're not that huge here. We have about 80 people that work here totally.
Okay.
Um, so I mean, I have a nice number of people that I supervise, and uh, one is making sure everybody does what they're supposed to do, and the other side is compliance with our clients to ensure the customer service side, because we are at their level. We're there talking as if we're at the hospital.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. And also, we have Zenon with us today. He has 26 years of debt recovery experience, actually spent the last 6 years as the president of General Revenue Corporation, which focuses on collecting student loans and consumer loans. And then he also has an extensive background in training and operations. Is there anything else you'd like to add about your experience and what you're working on at GRC?
Um, I think from an experience standpoint, what'll be most relevant today is the fact that my background is in training and operations. So for 26 years, I started as a collector, and so I've been on the phones. I've been a collector that was a little risky at times and had to curb that back. So I have perspective there. I have perspective at a lot of the levels moving up, and I've seen just about all of the mistakes that agents make that can be be curbed in the beginning. So I think that background is going to be very relevant to this discussion.
Definitely. I'm sure that will be. That makes a whole lot of sense. So with that, we can go ahead and get this conversation going. And we'll just start out with a level set about what you both think are some of those riskiest agent mistakes. And maybe just to start us off, since you were just speaking, maybe Zenon, based on your experience, out of all the potential mistakes that agents could make, are there ones that stand out as being especially risky from your perspective?
Yeah, so what I did to get prepared for this is obviously for me, my number one concern is litigation with a student or debtor to our company. So when I've looked at all of the litigation that I've seen or been a part of over all the years, there's always what I know we can control, right? There are sometimes litigation that happens that we can't control, but what we can control, there's always 2 factors that always come back. One is the behavior, of the collector on the phone, which can be, you can train that, and you can help the agent in how they manage themselves to not create that liability. And then the second piece is really the do not call back, or I don't want to be called anymore, where the agent either chose not to hear it, or they heard it, but they didn't make the necessary documentation or take the number out of the system. Very simple things that could have been done to where we ended up calling that consumer back, and obviously you agitate them, and at that point you may end up getting a lawsuit. So from my perspective, those are the two biggest that we spend the most time on, that we can control and put our company in a good spot.
Got it. Okay. And maybe for a second, if we just drill down on that a little bit. So you'd mentioned things like potential lawsuits.
Yeah.
Is that really the biggest thing that's at stake when agents do get things wrong? Like, they're only humans, mistakes happen. Is that primarily the biggest concern that you're looking at, or are there other things?
No, there are a lot more. So when you drill down,
Yeah.
to your point, most of those conversations, even if the collector and the consumer have a disagreement, they generally don't end up in lawsuits.
Sure.
What'll happen is, number one, for us, our client's reputation is at stake because we are an extension of the client. The last thing that we want is that particular consumer going back to the client and feeling that they were wronged, or feeling that they weren't heard. Because at the end of the day, these folks do not want to be in collections. Nobody asks to be in collections. So when you're on the phone with them, you really want to give them the respect and the time and the patience to talk through what is the issue and what's going on. And if that particular consumer does not feel that they were heard, or the collector was, kind of what that second bullet is, inflexible or uncaring, it's going to frustrate them and frustrate the process. And you're not going to end up with a resolution at that point if you're not willing to be soft. So, and the other part of that too, to add to it, is we also don't want, here at GRC, the culture starts from me all the way down. The last thing that we have here is a culture that is going to have abrupt conversations or be inflexible, because if our collectors are that way, then they're probably that way with each other and with their leadership, and the leadership spills into it, and it really creates a toxic work environment. So to have a great environment, internally, you really have to have very good conversations on the front end.
Yes. Okay. Completely understand that. You'd mentioned there about with your agents, representatives being an extension of the team. And that's reminding me of what you were mentioning, Tomekia, where a lot of people that you're working with on the healthcare side, you said they are considered an extension of the team. So from your side, thinking about agent mistakes, are you concerned about some of those same things, about the attitude of people when they're talking on the phone? Or are there other mistakes that come to mind that you might think are even introducing more risk? Or what thoughts do you have there?
Well, from the standpoint of working for our clients, since we don't buy debt,
Mm,
we work for our clients even on the third-party collection side. I always preach that we would rather you talk through an account with a patient instead of abruptly cutting them off, like Zenon said.
yeah.
We have a culture of wanting things now, and collectors want money now. So the you come in, with the idea, that you're working a job, but on the back end there might be a bonus depending on how much money you make. But then it creates a culture of, how much can I get? How soon can I get it? Who do I need to make them mad,
Mhm.
so to
Yeah.
speak? So I tell people, dealing with medical debt, you're going to have somebody get on the line that tell you why that was generated. It could be from cancer. It could be from a child passing away or something. And you have to have some sort of compassion coming into the door. That's what I look for on the onboarding process. I try to nip it in the bud if I can, to be honest. And sometimes that's hard because people will come in and, like you say, human mistakes. People make mistakes, but are they correctable? Is there something are we going to put ourselves at risk, like Zenon said, for litigation because we have a rogue collector out there? So my job is twofold. Not only do I train you coming in the door, I also have to gauge how you're going to be on the phone.
Mhm.
And if within that 30 days, I don't feel like you will make it, I politely have to let you go. And sometimes I'm wrong, but I would say my score is really, really good. It's really, really good. I tend to kind of hone in on people that have compassion. you kind of show that in your interview. And some people that come in that don't have that level, especially the type of debt that we're collecting, I can't have you here. I can't lose a client because I'm dealing with someone who just doesn't want to get on board with the way we do things.
And I'll add to that too, where she's absolutely correct. And a large part of it is, especially in training, in our HR onboarding, so when you kind of reverse engineer from the worst possible thing that can happen, which is litigation, to the next, which is a client gets upset with you, and you bring that all the way forward to day one of training. Our HR onboarding is very serious about what our culture is, how we do things. I will talk to our new hire classes and say, here's the expectation. And then to Tomeka's point, in the first 30 days, if we have a collector, they're going to make mistakes. But if we have a collector that we feel is not going to be a good cultural fit, then we are going to move on, because it's not worth the risk. It's not worth putting all of this at stake, because it's not a hard thing to ask, right? There is a balance to it. So day one, first 30 days is very critical, because then you also have staff that says, hey, that person gets away with it, or I heard that person talk a certain way and they're still employed here. They may start to push it, and you just simply can't have that.
Definitely.
Yes, develop bad habits.
Yeah. That seems like, that first 30 days, like you're saying, just seems so crucial to make sure you're setting everyone up for success. And we've already started to kind of like tiptoe into this topic when we talk around hiring and onboarding, which makes sense. It's a natural extension to talk about being proactive, so trying to get ahead of these. So one of the things I was curious here is, so I would think that having set policies and procedures would be helpful, but I'm curious, maybe Tomekia, your thoughts on this. How do you balance having set policies and procedures with also giving agents the independence and flexibility to do their jobs? And how do they know where that line is? Or any thoughts that you might have around that? Or giving them kind of independence? I'll let you.
So when I set myself up for training to let my new hires know that the laws are the laws. We cannot get by the laws, and even they're ever changing. I tell people, you come in, we might do it one way today, and tomorrow something might happen, and we do it another way. You got to be prepared for things like that. But with that being said, if you have a person that comes in and generally wants to do the job, then I will train you. I will train you the best way I can. And the laws are the laws. I train it with no fluff, straightforward. And I let them know, but there are policies and procedures that go along with that you're going to be able to get a slap on the wrist for. Because those are policies that aren't going to get us sued. Those are Rash Curtis policies. Those are our internal policies. But the law itself, I can't help you with that. I can bring you to the water, but I can't make you drink it. That's really true when it comes to making mistakes that could get us a lawsuit, and I really stress that all throughout the 30 days. And when you're done with my class, I'm still stressing it in your audits and things like that, to know that you're tiptoeing on breaking the law. Let's come in and let's figure this out, because we don't need to have a person like that on our team.
Yes.
And if you can't get them to overcome, those errors, then we really have to cut our ties. And it's taken me a long time to get to this point, because, I'm human first. People are people. You want to give somebody a chance. But if their chance is going to cause my company to shut down because of lawsuits, then, it kind of is what it is when it comes to that.
Yes.
I'm very, very strenuous about the way I train and the laws.
That sounds completely reasonable. Yeah, when I'm thinking, Zenon, so you'd already touched a little bit on onboarding and training as well. Is there anything else that comes to mind when you think about proactively stopping mistakes? So whether that's, maybe it is rewards and recognition, maybe it's policies, procedures, or something else. Curious what you might think.
A new hire coming in, generally speaking, wants to do a good job. They want the company to recognize they're doing a good job, and they want to feel like at the end of the day they're contributing and they're on the right path. So for us, call listening. That is an unbelievably big part, because those are the facts. If you were to have an agent have a phone call, get off and write down how they think that call went and how they acted, their version of it may be different than the reality, good or bad, but it may be different than the reality. So we spend an extensive amount of time listening to calls, not only their own calls, but they listen to our top performer calls. So what they can see is, hey, here's our top performers. They're inside the lines. They're inside, kind of the policy or procedure, if you will, with what we expect. So we give them the ability to hear what it looks like to be a top performer, but do it the correct way. And then we recognize as much as we can. So when we have end of month celebrations, we're recognizing top performers in training for QA scores and all of those things. So it's not about fee up front as much or about money generated, because if you make it too much about money too early on, you'll have collectors push the envelope to get their name in lights from a fee perspective, where if you push the envelope on the QA score and in recognizing them on that regard in the first 60 days or so, that's their focus. And then we know that they can handle it and we kind of go from there. So that's, from a practical standpoint here, that's really what we spend most of our time on, to try to mitigate some of those. And that even goes along with, not just call listening, but looking at, we have a lot of what we call red flag reporting that we'll pull aside. So if a student or a consumer says, hey, don't call me, or even a third party, we then can make sure that new hire took the phone number out, handled it appropriately, so it's not back in the dialer or it's not back in another queue. So not only with call listening, we're also going to look at their documentation and their handling of accounts, so that we try to attack both ends. And we generally see over the course of 30 or 60 days, if their QA score stays high and the way that they're doing things stays inside of our policies and procedures, then they're really set up for success long term.
Got it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Tomekia, I'm curious. So if I'm thinking, so say I'm on the front lines, I'm an agent, and maybe I know I've made a mistake. Do you ever run into situations where how does that agent feel comfortable bringing that to you, letting them know I've done something wrong versus waiting for you to discover it on the back end? How do you make a culture where somebody feels like they could be comfortable to bring that to you? Or do you have any thoughts around that? It feels like it could be a major challenge from my perspective.
Well, I personally deal with a lot of people I've been working with for 15 plus years. They're veteran collectors. I use them a lot in training to bring them in to the new agents to see their perspective and how, to work an account, things like that, tiptoeing what Zenon said. But if you're on the front lines and you're making errors and I'm not catching them, which is rare because of Prodigal makes it really easy for me to catch things that my 3 agents can't catch with voice analytics. I can just put in a word or something and it'll just bring me back a list of things that it thinks that an agent may have made an error on or something. And of course we have to listen to it. But Tomekia has an open door policy. Even though most of my agents work abroad, I get an email, I get a phone call, and I'm quick to answer it. I always preach in my class that anytime that you have a suggestion or a mistake or anything like that, we're going to correct it.
Yeah.
And being proactive about that, shows your character, in my opinion. That way we don't have to, like you say, come back around and catch you doing things.
Yes.
But for the most part, most of my team that's here, they take it in stride. They understand, that they're not perfect. Nothing was malicious when they set out when this error happened, and I can 100% say that no one here on my staff is making errors on purpose.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, if we feel that the mistake or whatever happened was intentional, we have zero tolerance. You're not getting a coaching or a verbal. You're going straight to either a final or a loss of job, depending upon how severe it is, because that's a decision, and that comes from the heart. So if you're intentionally berating a consumer on the phone or you're intentionally trying to upset them, you can't have any tolerance for that, because that's likely not going to change. But to Tomekia's point, if they cross the line, but you can see why they were doing, or they just pushed a little too hard, or they weren't as flexible as they needed to be, but their intention was good, then we can work within that framework as long as it starts to get better. But if the intentionality was to be deceptive on a phone number or to intentionally try to upset somebody on the phone, in the case of they hung up on them, or they try to get that last word in, or they say something threatening that we can't do or wouldn't do, those are the things that you really can't have any tolerance for, because that spreads. All collectors know if they get away with something that they did intentionally, and there's really no penalty. Everybody knows that, and they know that. And what's to say to stop them the next time, and it being a little bit more, right? Collectors are always going to push the envelope. So you really just have to have control.
Always.
Yeah, that is a very good point there. And then again, it's the conversation's just flowing nicely. So we've started to kind of touch on this again, but I'm maybe a little bit curious. So like Tomekia, you'd brought up the technology side of things. Maybe Zenon, from your perspective, how does technology, software, things like that factor in to help with scalability? So a person that's managing a team can only do so much, only look at so much. How beneficial is that, or how are you using that?
Yeah,
on your
that
side?
it is. What's interesting is life without, and we'll use your product because obviously that's what we use. Life before your product, we thought was going along fine, and we thought we were doing our best to control risk and all those other things. But life with the product, it almost is. We're like, how did we survive prior? Because what Prodigal does is we have the ability to score and monitor 100% of our phone calls. We also build our red flag reports with certain keywords, certain buzzwords, and it can be per client, so it can be adjustable. But the reality is our team leaders, they're now a much bigger part in the QA process than they were prior, because prior, without that, you have a few QA agents. They're doing their best to monitor as many calls as they can, but it's random, and you're just simply not casting a wide enough net. Now, every call is scored. It's our scorecard that, along with the scorecard that comes out of the box, so to speak. So we have a simpler scorecard and we have a complex scorecard, but all of those scores are fed to our team leaders. The team leaders now do not have the ability to put their head in the sand and say, well, I didn't know that they were doing that, because that's typical for a team leader. They now have all the scores up front. They have all the reporting. They have the red flag reporting. They have everything that they need to run the most dynamic team, but also the most compliant team. So that really puts everybody out there, and it's kind of like fee, right? In collections, everybody's fee is out there. We publish it, so there's competition. We now publish 100% of our QA scores across the board. So you can't really hide. If you're a bad agent, it's going to show, and it will show really probably that day. So from a technology standpoint, we simply can't imagine our world without that moving forward.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And yet, Tomekia, from your perspective, how does technology come in? We've talked a fair amount about the human side. So are you using solution in a similar way? And I know you've also mentioned remote workforce and the trainings at the beginning in Kenya and Mexico. How do you do all that, not being located there, or keep in touch with them, or anything like that would be interesting to explore?
Well, I think the pandemic showed me that these setups with the phones and video calls and things like that just really got popular. So I started to utilize that a lot before the pandemic. And then when it happened and we really were made to go this route, I was already used to it. You know, I was used to doing that. But I feel like, you know, I lose things training this way. I like it in person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like to see my class. I like to see their faces, their mannerisms. I can look and see who I'm losing, when we need to get a break, you know, things like that. So I think for the technology point of view, what Zenon said, we do a little of both.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have reports that I run through Prodigal as well, using keywords, but we also do that. My team also goes in randomly and pulls and scores calls off a scorecard. So we do a little bit of both. I just don't have a big enough team, you know, to do everything that I would like. But overall, life before Prodigal, I can't imagine what I was doing before. Matter of fact, I know what I was doing. I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off, you know, because there were thousands of calls that I literally could not listen to, you know, and I, as a QA manager, you know, that bothers you because you know there's something in those calls, you know, and some teachable moments in there that I could use, or someone that was on the cusp of losing it and I missed it. You know, that Prodigal has really put that all back in a box for me, where I can just pick and choose and go and put in keywords and find those type of calls like immediately, instead of weeks down the line.
Well, you know, when we were back on side, to add to that, or back when we were on site, agents Agents wouldn't cross the line probably as much because their neighbors can hear it, their team leader can hear it, they're on the floor. It's really hard to get loud or to be abusive or those type of things when you're on the floor. Because of that reason, you're very visible. Being remote, and we're 100% collector remote. We have collectors from California to Vermont, Rhode Island, and
Oh, wow.
so we have no choice but to make sure that everybody's compliant through tools, and we have to have facts, and we have to have data, and you have to have recordings, because a large part of our company I've never met. I met them in the interview process. That's a half-hour process, and then it's over, and they've been with us for, since the pandemic for years, and we never met. The only way I can be sure that they're representing us is by having Prodigal or having it, because now the culture isn't just internally in these walls. The culture is really national, and I've got collectors that are in Texas and in Illinois, and everybody's different. And so to bring everybody together, you have to have a product like this that allows us to just go straight to the facts, which are call recordings, documentation, and that kind of thing. So it's really critical in the at-home environment moving forward.
Yes, completely could understand that. And we're getting close to the end. We might have time for one more question. And I'm curious, if you're thinking about all this, Tomekia, based on your experience and the time you've been in your positions, do you feel like while technology is evolving, so are regulations? Do you feel like your job is getting easier, harder, or honestly staying about the same?
Definitely harder.
Yeah.
Medical debt is becoming having so many laws to protect the consumer, which I agree with. They need consumers like myself. We need to be protected from things. But in California, they're making it so hard with medical debt that we're almost looking to go in another route. Because of now with credit reporting. The bureaus have gotten together and say, hey, if you pay off a medical bill, we're going to delete it. And that takes a lot of tools away from the collector at that level, because deletion from the credit report was one of the biggest tools to use. Let's just be honest, if you can get that removed and act like it never was there, that tool really was a big deal for us. But things change. Regulation F, another one. We were dealing with a lot of new nuances about it that our veteran collectors had a hard time getting over.
Yes.
Because they were fossils. They were used to doing it a certain way, but we got on board. We got it. We got them to comply. It took a while.
Definitely.
Seriously.
Yes.
Yeah, but we got there. We got there.
Yeah. So then, same question to you, Zenon. In about 60 seconds or so that we have left, has your job gotten easier, harder, stayed the same?
We don't collect medical, so I think, and I know the medical side is much more complex. For me, it's all in how you look at it. Yeah, things are changing, but they're always changing. I've been doing this for 26 years. It's always changing. It's always evolving. It's all in how you handle it. So to answer your question, I think it's pretty status quo. A new law comes out with a state. We just figure out, okay, how do we work within that law, be compliant, and how do we collect money? So it's all in the messaging to our collection staff. Reg F was a perfect example where we were 9 months ahead of that in terms of getting it out to our staff so that they were prepared and ready and they weren't upset. And so it's all how you manage the message, but you can't get real tipped over about, compliance and laws and all that in our industry, because it is what it is. It's not going to change. So
fair. All right, well, this half hour just flew by, so we are now at the end of the webinar. As a quick reminder to everybody, we will send out this recording to you, so you'll get that by the end of the week to watch this back, share it with colleagues. And before we leave, I wanted to thank both of you for sharing your insights with us. This was a great conversation.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. All right. And thanks everybody as well for joining, and hopefully we'll see you in a future webinar. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Kevin. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.